Okay.
Hi, everybody. It's Patrice and Zarin, and we are going to go over a contract. So Zarin's been working with the contract and practicing this skill because we want to be the best that we can be. And she's done a great job, and we are going to go over that for you so that you can see how I go through a contract with a client. And so Zarin's going to be my buyer today. So Zarin, are you ready to buy a house?
Yes. Good morning,
Excellent.
Patrice.
Okay. Well, Zarin, we're going to start with our documents, and it's 16 pages total. And we're going to call this the purchase contract, although to be honest, there are a few documents in here. So the first document that you see, it says disclosure regarding real estate agency relationship, and we just call that agency. And what this form talks about is the different ways that you can be represented by your agent. So I am the listing agent for our team, so I am always the seller's agent. So in this, it's telling me what I can and should do and what my duties are. So when I'm working for the seller, my interest is only for the seller. I have to give them my very best. It also says, however, that we cannot defraud the other side. So we can't withhold any material facts. And a material fact for a seller would be, say, if we knew there was a foundation problem or some sort of a leak that wasn't obvious, we have to disclose that. I have to disclose that as much as the seller. So that's explaining what's going on there. I won't, however, say, hey, my seller's willing to take this dollar amount, because that would be me breaching their trust. When I'm representing the seller, I'm working with someone who's representing the buyer, and that's the buyer's agent. So the buyer's agent is going to come in and they have to do their very best for the buyer. So they're going to not tell me what the buyer would be willing to pay. However, they also can't withhold any material facts. And a material fact for a buyer would be if they're not really qualified for this home, if they're writing on multiple properties, if they really are just testing us out and don't have any intention. Our contract does have the term good faith in it, so we always want to make sure that we're operating in good faith. And as these agents, this explains their duties. The next one talks about agent representing both the buyer and a seller. So this is in the same situation if the buyer and the seller would be represented by the same agent. And this could happen if it's the same actual agent, say if I were to represent both sides, which is not something I do, but that would apply. It also would apply if someone from my same brokerage would be selling that house. So if the same broker of record is representing any of the agents in their office, then that's considered a dual agency as well. So it goes through to talk about the seller and buyer responsibilities. And again, it's one of those things that I have to disclose everything I know about the property, the seller has to disclose everything about the property, and the buyer has a responsibility to find out anything that they feel may be important about that property. So I'm just going to scroll down. Obviously, everyone signs. The second page has no signatures, and it really just goes through a lot of examples of how that could play out. So I gave you the breakdown, but there's even more. The next form, it's ironic because it's in the document. So whether or not we're working with different brokers or the same broker, we still always sign this. And it just outlines that a little bit more. And it's giving both the seller and the buyer always end up signing this document, which says that they are willing to having some sort of dual agency. Now, again, remember the agents have to disclose if that is the case. So you're definitely going to know if that's their situation. But that's what this form is all about. The next one is wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. So unfortunately, there have been some yucky people that have been taking advantage of people, finding out that people are in escrow, and a number of people actually ended up accidentally sending their deposit funds to people that were performing fraud. Sorry, that was my tummy if you heard that. So because of that, we've actually put a hold on sending out a lot of wires, and we're going back to cashier's checks a lot. But this is an advisory that both the buyer and the seller have to sign. Now, typically only the buyer is wiring money out. They put this even in the listing document, and I think they do this because obviously if the buyer loses 3%, which is the standard deposit in our area, it really may impact their ability to buy. So this is something that's very serious. A lot of times the title companies are actually encrypting their emails that they're sending out. But I always just tell our clients is you really want to make sure that you know exactly who you're sending. If someone is asking you for something, always double check with us as the agent just to be safe. At the beginning of our transaction on our team, we actually send out a little email that says who you're working with, and it has everyone's contact information. So if we can keep our buyers and our clients always looking at that, go take a look at that email, and then you'll know exactly who you can send money to. Okay, so page 5, now this is when we're actually in the actual purchase agreement. So Goes through everything. Obviously, the fill in the blanks are fairly easy because it's a different color. So it says when it's prepared, it'll say the name of the buyer. It'll have the real property address saying the city. It'll have the county and the parcel number. So the parcel number is great to have because when it's time for taxes to be paid, if you can't find your tax statement, you can always go to your county services and put in that parcel number. And this is a unique number for each particular house. So that's something we always make sure to put in there. There are situations where addresses are very similar, or someone might forget a unit number. So it's nice to see that you're not in contract on the wrong house. So the parcel number is important. Obviously, it has the purchase price on there. So we're going to put in the purchase price. And what it's saying is this is the purchase price of the offer. If you have any counter offers, then the last document that's signed would be the one that supersedes where price goes. Close of escrow. So here Zarin actually put a date of October 29th. I always love putting a date because we can ensure that we don't accidentally put a weekend. Personally, we always like to close on attempt to close on a Wednesday or a Thursday. And the reason is because if we can give if we can close on a Wednesday or a Thursday and give the seller a couple of days to move out to Friday or Saturday, first of all, it makes us look awesome, which we are super nice about. And then second, if we're off by a couple of days, then hopefully the seller doesn't have their mover in place and it doesn't cause that much trouble, because every once in a while we do close 1 or 2 days late if the seller's running a little bit behind, and we do have tight deadlines in our area, so this does happen. Okay, section 2, agency again. So this is where it outlines who the brokers are. So in this case, you want to make sure that one of those boxes will be checked. So in this case, Zarin has written it out with Antioch Real Estate, so they would be representing the seller only. And then Zarin and Keller Williams will represent the buyer only. So, and Zarin put the broker numbers in there, and they put that so that the buyers can check up on us if they want to. Or the sellers, to be honest, right? The sellers also get to review this document before they get into contract. Okay, we've got our deposit in there, and 3% is the standard deposit in our area. Almost all areas practice this way. Sometimes when we're out in Pittsburgh, Antioch, Brentwood, we'll see actually lower deposits, especially where there's a lot of FHA. However, I'm not sure why that happens because an FHA is usually 3% down anyway. But we always want to be as strong as possible in our deposit because it looks great if we're solid. Zarin has our loan amount. Of course, the conventional loan is at 80%. So that's a 20% down payment. So she has that filled out. She has a mortgage interest rate in there. The reason that it's important for us to have an interest rate and talk about the loan in the purchase contract is for a couple of reasons, actually. The first reason is because if the loan rates were to go up significantly, and I don't expect that for a while, but if they are, this gives the buyer the ability to cancel the contract based on that term, because what they're saying is I'm willing to buy the house at this price in these terms. So they're actually giving themselves a situation that if they need to cancel for because they can't qualify for the loan at a higher price, they could cancel that if they haven't removed their loan contingency yet, right? They want to make sure that they're locked by that point. The other reason that this is important to have is because we do a lot of rent backs in our area. And so this gives the seller and the listing agent an ability to find out exactly what that rent back would cost. So when someone is giving me a rent back, if it isn't free, which of course lots of times we have free rent backs, but if it isn't a free rent back, then I'm able to come here and calculate and say, Mr. Seller, this is what they're purchasing it for, and this is about what their interest rate is. This is about what your payment would be if you were to rent back for 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever that time frame is. So this is important information. Zarin does have a small credit, and this is a great place on additional financing terms to say that this is where the credit goes. I have seen them tucked into the contract. I'll actually almost call that hidden. So we always want to be as upfront and proud about all of our terms. So I love that she has that on there. So that's perfect. So seller to credit buyer, $2,000 toward closing costs. Perfect. Let's see. Okay, then it just reiterates the purchase price and the down payment here again. Page 2. This is where we really are getting into who pays for what. And the way that things work in our area is there are standards. There are customs in each county and each area. So, and the agents and the buyers have to apply to, and be a part of those standards. So we just really want to make sure that we're doing what's expected. So let's see. So section H, it is saying that we have a verification of closing costs. So she has verification attached, and that's perfect. In our area, we always want to show proof of funds presented with our offer. So our offer needs to have proof of funds. as well as an approval letter at the time. So the contract makes it sound like you could be flexible, but in California, we move too quickly and that will never get accepted. So she does have an appraisal contingency, which I love how you've done this, Zarin. So you've got an appraisal contingency is about 10 days, and then you have a loan contingency for 14. Again, we never go for boilerplate terms here, and the appraisal usually will come back a little bit before. So this is absolutely perfect. And of course, she does have on there that there will be a letter attached. So this is just kind of making sure that that's set. The loan and appraisal contingencies are where you would, if the appraisal were to come in low, this is where we could cancel because of that, or you could attempt to renegotiate. That certainly doesn't always happen in this market. However, it is the possibility. The contract does give you that power. Also, if you do not get your loan rate locked or you cannot fulfill one of the terms, this is where you would end up canceling. And typically in our area, the loan contingency is the last thing removed. So once you are removing that, which is 14 days in, that's when the seller can really commit, move forward and make their very best decisions. And it's also typically when the deposit is at risk. Every once in a while, we have a no loan contingency box checks. It isn't in this particular contract, but it is something that we use in our market because it is so competitive. Let's see, buyer stated financing. It's just saying that, you know, we're expecting the buyer to be telling the truth. The addendum and advisories. So the buyer's inspection advisory is always on there. That is, I always think, the most powerful document in real estate. Sometimes other things will go. We haven't had short sales for a while, but that's definitely on there. We always want to make sure that if the property is held in a trust because someone has passed away, or if there's a probate, you actually have a probate and trust advisory. And the reason is because the seller actually has different duties. They're exempt from quite a bit if you're in one of those situations, and the buyer needs to know up front. Let's see, what is? So Zarin is asking on other terms, is there anything such as a credit that you would put in here? Zarin, because you put your financing up front near the financing, I think that's better. Yes, sometimes people do put credits in here, but I don't think this would apply. Every once in a while, this is where you could put something if there was something unusual or odd, if there was like a solar lease and your client was saying, we don't want to take this on, we'd like for this to be paid off. Any of those kind of terms you could certainly put in there. We just want to make sure that everybody sees it. Allocation of costs, so section 7. So this is again where we're following who pays for what. So the seller is typically or always, I think a bank owned is the only time this doesn't apply, paying for the natural hazard disclosure. So you want to use a reputable company. And what this is saying on a natural hazard disclosure is that the seller has to disclose everything they know about the property. This is you choosing a reputable company to make sure that you are giving all of that information to the buyer. I have absolutely had deals cancel because of a natural hazard disclosure, because there was liquefaction, or because there's a red spotted tree frog on the property and someone won't be able to build what they want. Any of those things can happen. So this is important. The other thing that's on there is also the taxes. So it'll talk about the taxes, whether there's a mellow ruse or some other supplemental tax. It's all going to be listed on there. Some of our cities and counties have really high taxes, and the buyer needs to know that up front. Obviously, that's very important. So this is a really important document, even though it really does cover the general area, not always just the specific home. So let's see. And on there, Zarin would just put the company name, which she just kind of still has open, which is awesome. Back in the day, we used to always say who paid for what inspection. We used to have actually, I think WPA was the form, and it would say who paid for what on the pest report. We don't say that anymore. We don't talk about pest reports and those kind of things in the contract the way that we used to. And the reason is because we don't always want the lender to know exactly what's on there. It's none of their business, really, in my opinion. It's for the buyer and the seller to decide. So the way that it works, the standard is that if the seller has bought them already and given pre-disclosures, which is very common, they're paying for them. If they haven't, then they've made a decision that they're not willing to. And so the buyer then orders their own and pays for them. In many cases, I will still get buyer's inspections even when seller inspections are provided. And it really just depends on the house. And it really depends on the buyer's comfort, because you just never know if something is missed, or it's just nice to hear it all at the same time. And for the inspection, obviously it's a good place to negotiate, but really it's about finding out about the quality of your home. You're getting into a relationship with your house, and you should know it left and right. So even though it's not in there. Okay, now we're moving to the next page. We're on page 7, so that's B2. And the seller has to pay for any government mandatory things. So in places like Oakland, where it's required for you to have the sewer lateral, there will also be an additional addendum so that the seller doesn't automatically have to pay for those. They get to decide on that too. But things like smoke detector being in every room, things like carbon monoxide detector being required on every level, and the water heater double strapped is absolutely a requirement. There are also some gas shutoff valve issues for people that are not in the city limits that sometimes will apply. So every city is going to have their own little standard, and so we're asking for the seller to take care of those. It's something the buyer still needs to know, and it's their responsibility. So Section C, title and escrow. So in Alameda and Contra Costa County, this is a buyer pay county for title and escrow. If you're in Santa Clara, that is actually a seller pay area. So we always want to make sure where we are and find out that standard. We can look it up online. The title companies have it, or we can ask the agent that we're working with. So this is definitely important. And so what I usually will say is the buyer pays, and then per county standards or something common in Contra Costa County or Alameda, kind of wherever that is. So, and again, in some places it's shared 50-50. So it's different on every city. Other costs. So the seller always pays for the county transfer tax, and the buyer and seller always share the city transfer tax. We never want it to just be seller pays for the city transfer tax. Those are very expensive in a lot of cities, and the area standard is for it to be shared. When a seller sees that a buyer is saying it's not shared, they're going to feel like they're trying to be taken advantage of. They won't realize that someone maybe doesn't know. So again, we always want to make sure to really strictly follow that area standard. HOA fees. So there's two things here. So we always ask for the seller to pay for the HOA dock fee, because we don't know if we're going to buy it. I've actually had a lot of cancellations because of HOA docs, usually on minor things, and I think the people have oftentimes regretted it. However, it does happen. So the seller should pay for that, because they're going to have to give that out no matter what. However, I always think that it's fair for the buyer to pay for the transfer fee. So again, it's subjective. However, we want to show that we're fair, kind of a 50-50 split. And so the buyer who's causing the transfer should pay for that transfer fee. When you're working in Rossmore, by the way, there is it might be 9,000 now, or it might have just gone up to 10,000. There's a golden rain fee that is always required, and the buyer always pays that one. So that one's a little different. Home warranty used to always.
Can I ask you one question? Sorry.
Sure. No, go for it.
You said the seller pays for the HOA transfer fee. Is that right?
Document fee. The seller pays for the document fee. The buyer pays for the transfer fee.
Oh, seller pays. Okay.
I wish they were in different order, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. And then on the home warranty, it used to always be sellers, and I always encourage my seller to be willing to, and I think that's standard. Something always happens the first year, so it's definitely nice to have that in place. However, these days and in this market, a lot of times the buyers are waiving those fees, the buyers are paying for it on their own, or it can be, or an agent can choose to pay for it. We always want to specify something on there. So it's either going to be buyer pay, seller pay, or waiving. If we're in a really competitive situation, then have the buyer pay for it, because it's a small amount, right, to pay to get accepted. Whereas if it's not in that market, then ask the seller to pay for it, because it is something that has been typical for a very long time, and it'll save both sides a lot of headache. Again, it's also something that could be a nice gift. Section 8, items included and excluded from the sale. I have had to buy a couple of refrigerators. When I first started, you used to actually type in the refrigerator if it was in there. So I have had a couple of times when they made a change, it's only this little box, that I missed that little box and then had to buy my seller a refrigerator, because they didn't know, they weren't planning on leaving it, and we didn't get to negotiate that out. So this is one of those things. A stove always has to come with it. You cannot get a loan if there's no stove. I've literally, on a short sale years ago, we had to go out and buy a stove and have it installed so that we could get a loan on this house. And it was such a really great deal. My clients made a fortune on it. It was well worth the effort that we put in, but you cannot get a loan without a stove. You need heating and a stove, otherwise you will not be able to get a loan. All cash is different. The refrigerators, maybe 50-50 it stays, and then the washer dryers are about 25%. So what I always tell my buyers is, if they're offering it in the MLS, then we'll ask for it. If they're not offering it, we don't want to ask for it, because I certainly don't want to negotiate on $1 million house and we're having negotiations about fighting over some old washer and dryer that we can get on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace for $500. Again, it's just not worth it. However, this is where we'd put it on here. So on the MLS, If it's listed, then we'll ask for it, and if it isn't, then we won't. Items leased or liened. We used to just get to ignore this section. Now it's a big deal because solar leases are getting to be fairly common. If someone is taking over or buying a house with a solar lease, it either needs to be paid off or that person needs to qualify so that they can take over that lease and those payments. So it's a whole different system of qualifications. They're going to have to go through an application process. So just we always want to make sure that our buyers and sellers are very aware of what's going on there. Included and excluded from the sale. Again, this is all kind of stuff. It talks about TVs, flat screens, things like curtains and curtain rods. I had to buy curtains too, by the way. Lots of lessons in real estate. So technically, if anything is attached and screwed into the wall, typically a buyer is going to assume that's going to stay. Curtains and curtain rods is always a very gray area. If your buyer or your seller loves it, you always want to be specific. So a lot of times I will expect, and I'll tell my sellers that curtain rods should stay. If they want those particular ones, they should change those out, or we need to specifically disclose that they are not welcome. The curtains are tricky. It's hard to decide. Sometimes they're matching, sometimes it's matching the furnishings on there, especially if it's custom and on a luxury home. So you really want to be specific. If your buyer wants them, make sure you say it specifically on there because it's hard to know for sure. Brackets, again, if TVs are installed, we want to make sure that we are very clear on how we want that to go. It gets faster from here, you guys. I know this was a lot, but I think that is very important stuff to know. Section 9 on closing and possession, it's saying, are you going to be buying it to live in it, or are you going to be buying it as investment property? This is very important. If someone accidentally clicks that button and a lender thinks that they're buying it as an investment property, the loan and the requirements will be very different. So back when I did loans, I would see agents making this mistake all the time, and then they would yell at us like, what's going on? I'm like, well, you said on there you're not going to live there, and then they have to jump through some hoops. So definitely important for that. We never want to, it talks about seller occupied or vacant property. So if it's seller occupied, it just says on the date that we want it. It usually takes till about 2 o'clock on the date of county records. So I will usually say that we'd like the keys around 2 o'clock unless we know that something's different with the seller. But I think that's usually works out. Oftentimes, as you heard me say before, I will give 2 extra days if I know someone's living there, no matter what. We'll convince our buyer that it's a great idea. It makes us look more thoughtful and considerate. And again, it kind of buys us that cushion should we need it, because we're writing our contract terms with as few days as possible. So we'll have respect. So it kind of buys us a little bit of time. So we put it on there. If you're going to be having, you're going to be staying longer than 30 days, then you would end up with an RLAS form, residential lease after sale. And if you're just, I hope I'm saying this right. And then if you're just doing it less than 30 days, then you'll just do a little form of, it's called SIP, seller in possession. And so you just are clarifying who's paying for what. Typically the utilities are going to be paid by the person who's been living there the whole time. It's still going to happen. And then the seller is going to be obviously paying the mortgage. And oftentimes the buyer will give credit for that. So tenant occupied property. So we do not want our buyer to be taking over property where a tenant is living there. So we really want to make sure that we give that tenant time to move out, because especially in areas where we have rent control issues, if that tenant is still there and they change their mind and don't want to move out, that is now, congratulations, that is your issue to deal with. And there's not much that can happen. So on a tenant property, unless you know that you're taking that tenant on, which again, I don't agree with, you really want to make sure that that tenant is out comfortably, even if it delays the closing, to be quite honest. So there is a form, tenant in possession. I've never used it because, again, I've always encouraged that get your own tenant. They're easy to find, and you can start this new relationship. It's just tricky to do that transfer. All right, so now we're just kind of getting down to it. So this is talking about disclosures. So there's going to be a lead-based paint disclosure. Prior to 1978, lead-based paint was common. It was kind of everywhere. So the seller is going to say what's happening. Usually paint has been covered, hopefully. Gosh, I can't imagine what a house would look like if it hasn't been repainted in the last 30 years, but 50 years. But anyway, so that disclosure will be on there. Water heater bracing. There's a lot of stuff that's just general information, still great to have. And this is just outlining exactly what's expected and who's paying and who's responsible for what. An AVID form, you see that that's written in there, and that's the agent visual inspection disclosure. When I started in real estate, it was just a little one-page document. We kind of scribbled in all the stuff that we saw wrong with the house. Now the AVID has been used, and it's a lot more common, and it's a 3-page document where the agent has the responsibility to go through and write down anything that they can visually see. So scratches and scuffs and nail holes in the walls and stains on the carpet. We want to make sure that our client doesn't miss anything. Of course, the inspectors should do their stuff. It's just making sure that we are familiar with the property as well. Let's see. And natural and environmental hazards disclosure and booklets. Back in the day, again, everything was a lot more paper and we'd send out these huge forms. Now the natural and environmental hazard disclosure and booklets, it's actually a link in the natural hazard disclosure report email. It's definitely harder to find, so we want to make sure that we're always reading that and that our buyers always see that and click on that link. It's just a lot of generic information. However, it is important. The buyer's signing that they've received it, so they better make sure that they get it. Withholding taxes. So obviously, if it's a foreign investor, if a foreign investor is selling a house, or if it's an investment property, then the state may withhold up to 3% of the sales tax. It's written in the buyer's contract because it's very important that they know, because gosh, if there isn't enough equity, they're going to have to come out of pocket or it will damage the sale. Megan's Law database. As realtors, we cannot go on and say where the sexual predators are. However, we always make sure to give this address so that someone can take a look. I've had a cancellation based on that too. Perfect yard. Oh my God, one of the best yards I've ever seen. And 3 people that were in the database were all within a block, and my client made their decision, which they were very happy with, to cancel on that purchase contract because of this Megan's Law. So definitely important to get that out early and often. Now they added the gas pipeline report to the NHD after there were some problems a couple years ago in San Bruno. If it's a condominium, hopefully it's pretty obvious. However, there are some neighborhoods that it's a PUD, so a planned urban development, and it does have some HOA. So we want to make sure that all of that stuff comes out as early as possible. So, we're asking for 7 days from the seller. Hopefully they disclosed it already. Condition of the property. So this is interesting. Again, different in the Santa Clara area where they use the PRDS form. So this is saying that the house is sold in its present condition. If you ask and you want to do some inspections, you can see what you can see. You kind of can't really see behind the walls. It's also saying through all of this stuff that if you ask for something to be repaired, they have to do diligent work, but they don't necessarily have to have it done by a licensed contractor unless we specify on there. So we always want to be really particular about that. Buyers' investigations. So buyers have the right and the duty / responsibility to find out everything they know about that property within their buyer's inspection advisory, within their buyer's contingency period. So no matter what it is, they need to go. It's their responsibility to find that out. The seller doesn't know what's important to a buyer. It wasn't important to them because they're living there. The buyer has their own right, and they also have that responsibility. So that's really a big deal. Title investing, this is where I always want to tell the buyers that this is a good time to consider how to hold title. So married couples oftentimes do it as married couple with the right of survivorship, community property with the right of survivorship. A lot of times people like to put their home in a trust. People will forget about this later. So this is a great opportunity for them to think about how they want to hold their property and what's going to happen. And typically, there are a lot of reasons for it, but if one spouse were to pass away, what happens to the home? Does it automatically go to the other spouse? Is it going to go to your children? Is it going to be shared 50-50? There's a lot of different, the vesting will be handled differently. So this is a great opportunity to consult an attorney to ask those questions and make sure that you're handling this right. The title has a little sheet that we can share that says common ways to hold title, but it's a great idea for us to advise them to get professional advice on this. Let's see, time period. So it's funny, I don't know why they wait this long in the contract, but this is where we talk about our inspection advisory. So on section 14, we want the seller to tell us everything they know within 3 days, and then the buyer has so many days to find out. This is getting waived a lot as well, but the buyer, this is where the buyer is saying, if I find out that there's something wrong in a report, I may want to negotiate that price because that may change the value for me. Well, you better figure it out within this time period, because once you sign that contingency removal, you are committing to this house. And again, sometimes you'll have a removal of contingencies. Now, you're not going to have a contingency period up top and a removal. It should only be one of the other. So you definitely, we are seeing a removal of contingencies with the offers a lot, which is why they actually added here so that the buyer knows very clearly that they are removing contingencies, which means they're buying the house as is. They know what they need to know, and they're not going to negotiate or ask for anything else. Otherwise, their deposit is already at risk. right? And it even says on here, buyers acting against the advice of the broker. It's kind of funny how that works out. But again, it's one of those things that is common in our market, but it's very, very risky. So seller's right to cancel. Sorry, sellers, once you sign that contract, you cannot cancel unless the buyer does not perform any of their duties. So they have to get their deposit in within 3 business days. They have to have their contingencies removed for inspection with whatever the contract says, appraisal with whatever the contract says, and then loan, same. So if they don't do one of those things, then that's the only time that the seller has a right to cancel. So on Section E, this is how they would do it. It says that the notice of the buyer to perform. So the seller would then have to give a notice to perform to the buyer. It's a 2-day instrument unless it's different. On that time, the buyer could fulfill one of those duties, or if not, that's when the seller has the right to cancel. What happens then is if the contingencies haven't been removed, the deposit will go back minus any expenses. So an appraisal that's been ordered, any reports that have been ordered by the buyer, they're going to have to pay those things. So that's kind of how that works out. Close of escrow. So the buyer should be closing escrow on time. If they can't close escrow on time, then the seller would give them a demand to close escrow. Typically at that point, the contingencies are already removed. So that's a much scarier form. That's one of the scariest forms in real estate, actually, because it's saying you better close within 3 days or we're going to hold your deposit because you're dragging your feet. Now, typically, if we're in a good relationship with our sellers, they will give us some flexibility, but it's very important. We really take that document seriously. And this again goes into Section 8. It's really talking about getting into more details about what happens to that deposit. So again, the buyers, it talks about good faith in this contract, and the buyer is going to be covering whatever it is that they ordered or whatever losses that the seller has incurred on their behalf, because we really want to make sure it's moving forward. However, the buyer does have the right to do those investigations, so they do get their bulk of their deposit or their full deposit back if nothing has been damaged. Okay. And by the way, if you were canceling because you ordered an inspection and you think you wasted $1,000, know that that's the best $1,000 you've ever spent. We're spending an average of $1 million in the Bay Area, and you really want to make sure that you are comfortable with your home. So it all just kind of falls into the closing cost price, in my opinion. So verification of condition, Section 15. So in about 5 days before close of escrow, the buyer has the right to go back and take a look at the house. This always is funny because we do a lot of rent back. So it's kind of interesting. And people always say, well, what if they're staying there for an extra week or a month? What if something happens? Well, the contract is still protecting you that it has to be delivered in its as-is condition. So it's just kind of making sure that you feel pretty good about it. And it's also that if you ask for any repairs to be done, that's when we're going to expect for those repairs to be done. If anything is off, we're going to try and handle that before close of escrow, right? Now, again, if you don't get to see the property for a month later, the house is still expected to be sold in the condition that it was when you actually wrote the purchase contract. So, and the contract does protect you for that. Repairs. So actually, this is where it says that if we're asking the seller to repair something, that it just has to be reasonably diligently done work that's a professional quality, unless you specifically are saying that it needs to be done by a contractor. So electrical and plumbing, I always am specific. The other stuff, usually I'll trust them to make their best decision because they are held responsible for it to be good work. Prorations of property taxes and other items. I always love this one. So with property taxes, the way that it works out is that we are on a cycle of property taxes in California where it's January through June 30th is one period, and then the second is July 1st through December 31st, right? So however, taxes are due not at those exact times. They're due in February and then in November. So, I do that right? So when we're doing taxes, if we're closing, let's say in March, then the seller has already paid taxes for January through June. However, they're going to be giving up the house for a few months. So the buyer is going to give a credit for however many days from close of escrow to June 30th to that seller. Let's say it's the opposite. We close in July. The seller has not paid for their second half of the year taxes. So the buyer is going to end up paying for that in November. So it's the opposite. So the seller will then give a credit at close of escrow for however many days that they've owned the house from July 1st through close of escrow to that buyer, because the buyer is going to be paying for the taxes for that entire period. What's important to know here is that this is all going to be based, at least for the first year, on what the seller has currently paid. So if you're buying a house that has not changed hands in many years, you're going to have a very small tax rate, right? So the buyer is actually going to be covering taxes based on the seller's fee. That will end up with a supplemental tax report, supplemental tax bill. And sometimes you get 2. I've even seen 3 before. It's very odd. But we always want our buyers to be prepared to watch out for this, because they will be sending a bill to cover the difference. Ultimately, the county is going to get however many days that you owe based on your rate, but it could take a couple of tries. We want to make sure that you as the buyer and you as the realtor know to be prepared for that, so that it's not a surprise, because if you're late on your taxes, the penalty is 10%, which can be very, very big. Broker compensation. So the way that it works out is that as a buyer's agent, the buyer's agent is going to be compensated by the listing agent. So a listing agent, which is primarily what I will do, I will go out and I will meet with the seller, and we will come up with a marketing strategy and a compensation plan. We have that in our contract. We then put the house on the MLS typically, or on another off-market network, where we will offer a commission. And typically that's around 2.5% to 3% is the standard in the area. And so a buyer does not have to pay for their buyer's agent, which is awesome. So you actually get someone who's fighting for you, working really diligently for free, and you don't even have to pay them. So that's really cool. Not until it's time to sell, and that's on the side. So that is very standard in the area, and that is very common. Now, there are a couple of circumstances where someone is doing an auction, like a home bid system, where it says that the buyer will pay for their commission, or it will be added on to the purchase contract. So those are something that are handled specifically, and they've figured it out where it actually will be added on to the purchase price, and you can finance those things. So I'm happy to answer more questions specifically. Representative capacity, we don't usually see that very much, where a third party is actually involved. Joint escrow instructions. So this is saying that the purchase contract is, of course, what we're going to follow. We're also going to have to follow the escrow instructions, and the escrow instructions are going to get instructions from the purchase contract as well as from the mortgage company. So if they are requiring certain things, then the escrow company will require their instructions will follow that rule. So in other words, if you're putting less than 80% down, less than 20% down, then your lender may require you to have impound accounts. And what impound accounts is when you're prepaying for some of those taxes we talked about up front. And at certain months of the year, it's significant money. It's usually the average is about 3 months of upfront tax payments, so thousands of dollars, also upfront insurance payments. In addition, sometimes it can be up to 8 months. So when we're talking about a $20,000 a year tax bill, you could be coming up with a very large chunk of change that's going to be added to your down payment. So this is definitely important to know as well. Okay. Now we're getting into breach of contract. So this is what we call liquidated damages here. And so what this is saying that, and we do recommend that you sign this. I'm not an attorney, but this is very commonly used. It's saying that if something happens after contingency periods are all over and the buyer has to cancel, it's saying that the 3% is what we're calling a reasonable deposit, so that the seller can't go after you for more than 3%. However, the seller is kind of taking some loss, so they have a right to get up to 3% from you. I've had this happen before where we did not, we were the buyer actually. I've never lost a deposit, but we did take some of their deposit. We used this clause because my seller, who was buying another house, had more expenses, and they actually took losses. So this clause gave them compensation for all that they had lost so that they were made whole. So this is a great form. The next one is arbitration and mediation is what we call it. And this is optional. It is very popular to be signed. I've had attorneys that are happy to sign it because they don't want to go through a major lawsuit. And then I've had people that work for the government that said, I'll never sign an arbitration clause because I want to have my own rights. So this is one that we cannot give advice on one way or the other. It's something that the buyer has to choose. And typically the buyer will choose and then the seller will follow suit. I will say in our industry, it seems like people really like when everyone signs this form, so it gets signed a lot. But I will say that I've never pushed someone to sign that form, and I've probably had more blank ones than most agents because of that. And that's okay. But just know that when you're writing it, if you don't, sometimes the seller will actually counter and ask you to sign that. And again, that's a personal preference thing. Let's see. So selection of service providers, you can use anyone that you want. We are always going to suggest who we work with a lot. As agents, we do this over and over and over again. So we have some favorites because they usually perform well for us. But as the buyer, you're paying. So anything you're paying for, you get to ask for. It's ironic with title. A lot of times the seller's agent will like you to use their title. So it does happen a lot, but just know you can choose to do that as a negotiation tactic. However, it's definitely the buyer's right because they're paying. When we're all said and done, all of the information will end up going back on the multiple listing service, and that's how we end up getting comparable data for the next sales. That's how we go back and forth. Let's see. Attorney's fees, if we end up going into some sort of dispute, which has never happened, thankfully, for me with any of my clients, where we've sued one another, it's saying that the winner will have their attorney fees paid for. I think that's part of why people like that mediation and arbitration clause, because if you lose, you could pay for the other person's side. So a lot of times people love doing arbitration so that we just are just going to work it out together with a third party. Let's see, of course, we're never equal housing. We're never going to discriminate against anyone. We would definitely always do our best, especially on our team. We're all about treating everyone as the best version of themselves and seeing the best in everybody. So that will never happen here. Know that should you feel, or should anyone ever feel that they are discriminated against, that the contract does protect you. So even if it isn't us, if it's someone else in that transaction, that's not okay. And there definitely are laws that can protect people. Time is of the essence. I love this one. So this is saying you got to move forward. If you know you're going to cancel, you need to do it right away to respect the other side. So again, it's kind of that good faith and that intent. If you're kind of on the fence, you can continue to gather information, but the minute you know that you don't want things, you can move out. The minute you know you're not qualified, or if there's any problems, you need to move forward. So it's just really putting a lot of that respect in. Definitions, glossaries are, I mean, all of this is pretty basic. I think the main thing on here is days. So days means calendar days. So when we're talking about a 7-day inspection, it includes nights, weekends, holidays, whatever it is. However, it can never end on a holiday or a weekend. So anytime that your day ends on a holiday or weekend, it's automatically going to roll to the next day. If that, let's say it ends on a Sunday, it'll be Monday. If Monday's a holiday, it's going to be the following Tuesday. So that's kind of how it works out. And then we always put our expiration of the offer. The standard contract comes with 3 days, and typically people like to see it within 24 hours if possible. I always like to be fairly flexible. I can't stand when someone's pressuring my seller in a multiple offer situation. You're not going to hold my seller hostage. I find it to be disrespectful. So I always will ask the agent oftentimes what they'd like. And then in addition to that, just give them a little bit of time. Or if you're going to say that 24 hours, the reason that you'd like it to be fast, because sometimes we just say, there's a second house that I want yours more than the rest. So if you can let us know right away, that'd be really awesome. And if not, obviously I'll give you that much more time, but we're really hoping for, we always want to have that good relationship. There's just on there, you'll see that there's a little button that you can have presentation of offer. It's very rare that someone will send back if they, in our market, if they don't accept our offer. I mean, we're getting 20 offers. We're not going to send out cancellations to everyone. However, and there have been like 2 circumstances in my life where I wasn't sure if my offer was truly presented. You can ask for them to show you that it has been presented. If they accept, they're going to sign. If they give you a counter offer, it's going to be checked with that little box that says subject to the attached counter offer. Hopefully it's a regular counter offer. If it's a multiple counter offer, oh goodness, then it's back to the drawing board. On a multiple counter offer, any of those things can happen. Just because you sign it doesn't mean that you get it. Anything could happen. In some cases, they're sending out multiple counteroffers with different terms to different buyers. I think that's important. And then sometimes those buyers will actually counter back with better terms. They can say, hey, I want to make sure I'm beating the other person. They can say, we'll take it as is, or they can just say, no way. So you are still very much in negotiations when you get the multiple counter. Everybody's contact information is always here. And this is, again, where license information is. Once you get in contract, the escrow holder will fill out this information and send it back because the lender will require it. And this is, we're almost done, you guys, buyer's inspection advisory. So it really talks about all the things that a buyer could, should, and has the responsibility to investigate. That when I said it's the most powerful document in real estate, look at section L. If you read through that, it basically says that the buyer can back out within their contingency period for any reasons. And it goes through neighborhood, area conditions, schools, law enforcement, noise, odor, right? Wildlife and animals like nuisances, hazards, circumstances. I mean, it has everything, influences, conditions, cultural, personal reasons, religious. Basically, the buyer can back out for any old reason that they want based on, as long as they're in their contingency period. So that gives a lot of power to this being a very buyer-friendly contract. It also, though, in my opinion, gives a seller a lot of power, because once you've committed your deposit and remove your contingencies, this form has said, we're giving you every reason and you're moving forward. So it really moves forward. The last form is just a Consumer Privacy Act, just saying that we are not going to share your data. And it's our responsibility and obligation to keep everything very private. So, and that, my friends, is the purchase contract. Any questions?
Well, thank you so much, Patrice, for going over the contract. I appreciate it. And I'm sure it's very beneficial for everybody else. A quick question that I want to ask you, as I know the answer, but I just wanted to ask you, and it might be helpful for others, is it's very simple, is the Section D, other costs, number 10, the home warranty. If you can elaborate a little bit about it, it would be nice.
On the cost, on who pays for it, or what the home warranty covers?
Well, no, not the coverage, but who pays? How should we go by? My understanding is that either the seller will pay, because it's kind of like a token of a gift, or the agent. So can you tell me whether...
So the seller used to pay all the time. And what I tell my sellers is, we want to pay. We want to have something in place that's in between. And I've literally had sellers that said, oh, I don't like that home warranty. I bought this house and it had a home warranty and it didn't cover all the stuff that I wanted, because there's definitely limitations. And so I say to them, well, did you call the seller and complain to them? And they're like, well, no, we just got it fixed. And I say, well, the home warranty did its job. The home warranty is to be in place to cover the buyer from not every little thing. The seller is going to do their best to tell, but things break. It's normal. So this is something that, again, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask the seller for. And I think that in most cases, you should ask a seller for. However, I will say, in our very competitive market, I list houses, which we get a lot of offers. Right now, very few buyers are asking for the seller to pay for it. It's typically the buyer's waiving it, the buyer's paying for it, or the buyer's agent is choosing to give that as a gift. That does not have to happen. It's only a choice. I don't give those as gifts. I did years ago. I thought it was necessary. I don't anymore. I'd rather give them a gift that's different. The buyer can make their decision of what's happening. But it's just really a negotiation tool. The way that you should see it, the way is the seller technically should pay for it. However, it's $1 million house. And typically when we're negotiating, we're going up at $5,000 and $10,000 increments. If my buyer has a choice to just take out one thing that's only going to cost them $600 and they look more reasonable, that much better. We want to make sure that our offer always looks the best. We also want to make sure that our offer looks better than the next offer. So if we can do something that makes us look more reasonable, more considerate than someone else, then in my opinion, it puts us in a better negotiation position. If on $1 million sale, that something is only a $600 warranty, then all that much better. Now, the other things I've used warranties for, if there are some issues with a roof, then I'll say, hey, can you give us a 2-year roof warranty? That's a separate warranty. It's a nice way of saying, look, seller, I'm not asking you to cover that roof. All I'm asking for is for you to cover a little extra home warranty. So you can use that as a negotiation against your inspections when you have problems too. Now, here's the caveat to that. You can't have a pre-existing condition. So if the home warranty, if it's something that needs to be looked at right away, that home warranty company or they may ask to see the inspection report. And if it shows on there clearly that there's a problem, they may deny it. If it's just something like the heaters, the roof isn't leaking, but it's not great, then you'll be fine. If the roof is leaking, then it probably won't be covered. Same with like a heater. The heater's broken, they won't cover it. The heater's old, you want to keep that home warranty on for a very long time. And I tell my buyers, keep it on for year after year if your heater's old or your hot water heater, because it'll pay for itself. And it covers little things like dishwashers and doorbells. And, it's really a great thing to have. I know that didn't totally end. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Good.
That was really nice.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was informative for me and for others too. And
no question.
Forward. Yeah. Thank you so much. I think you covered pretty much everything. I don't have any question to ask you because you covered everything.
Well, and by the way, this is the way that I explain it to buyers. So I'm doing this for you to learn. Obviously, you're changing a little bit, but I literally am this thorough on every buyer that I review this contract with. I am this mostly, not quite, I'm almost this thorough with every seller that I do it with. When you can show how professional you are and that you are protecting someone, first of all, that's our job. It doesn't always happen. You're standing out between every realtor who's just showing them the fill in the blanks and saying, sign this via DocuSign. So when you go through this at the beginning of the process with your buyers, they're going to be so much more comfortable because you heard how it's like you can back out for any old reason. You have all these rights. And once they can get comfortable, then they can decide and fall in love with the right house for them. And they can really trust you and the contract to protect them. And they're just in a healthier, safer environment. So I love using this as a closing and sales technique for yourself, actually.
Great. Thank you so much, Patrice. Thank you for your time.
Yay. Well, thank you for making the time this morning as well. And of course, for our team or anyone else that's watching it, if you guys ever have any specific questions, let us know. That was the purchase contract for California. Have a great day.
Good day. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Oh, and by the way, if any buyers get this and they're looking for property in Fremont, Zarin, tell us your phone number.
Zarin Malakzaka, 510-709-5807.
Excellent.
Thank you, Patrice.
And
I am with Patrice Sandstrom's group. Thank you.
Yay!
Thank you so much. Thank you, Patrice.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye-bye.